Chapter 7. A Night Excursion. Brad and Dan were too stunned by Mr. Silverton's final accusation to make any attempt to follow him towards the house. As they stood gazing after the sportsman, the gardener, in an attempt to soften his employer's dismissal, said kindly, "Mr. Silverton's out of sorts today, lads. It was a blow to him losing those pheasants. He sets great stores by 'em." "We told him the truth," Brad said, stooping to pick up the wolf badge from the grass. "The cubs never intended to break any rules. As for killing pheasants, well, I can't believe it." The gardener leaned comfortably on his hoe. "It's like the boss said," he observed. "You may be honest and square yourselves, but how can you vouch for your friends? You didn't see what they did while they were alone." "No, but—" "And showing those Indian feathers at the village the way they did," the gardener went on, "why, it was circumstantial evidence. While Dobbs told around that the cubs had trespassed, it was only natural folks would put two and two together." "So that was what Silverton meant when he spoke of the Indian headdress," Brad muttered. "And it explains why the villagers gave us the icy looks today, and the cubs are in Dutch everywhere." "It makes me sick," Dan said in disgust. "Come on, Brad." Sunk in gloom, the two boys left the residential property and, with no destination in mind, went on down the street. The gardener's words, together with Mr. Silverton's accusation, now made everything plain. The entire cub organization had been incriminated on the basis of two pieces of evidence: the finding of the wolf-cub badge near the dead pheasants, and the thoughtless display of the feathers by Chips and Red. "I knew those feathers would get us into trouble," Brad remarked glumly, "and believe me, we're really in the soup." "Brad, you don't think that Chips and Red killed those birds for the feathers?" "No, I don't." "But Silverton's accusation is serious. We've got to see Mr. Hatfield about this right away." The two boys, anxious to unburden themselves, sought Mr. Hatfield at scouting headquarters. He listened intently to the entire report and then surprised them by saying, "To tell you the truth, I've been a little afraid something like this would develop." "Then you knew about the dead pheasants?" Brad asked in amazement. "No, but I noticed a few things at the pheasant farm which bothered me. By the way, you told Mr. Silverton about the log jam in the creek?" Brad and Dan gazed at each other in disgust. "I guess we were just plain dumb," Dan apologized. "We forgot about it." "Well, that's not surprising, considering how upset you were about Silverton's accusation," the cub leader said, reaching for his telephone. "You're calling Mr. Silverton now?" asked Brad. "No, first I want to talk to Chips and Red again. I'll ask them to come down here for a few minutes if they can." In response to the call from the cub leader, the other two boys made a speedy trip downtown again. Mr. Hatfield, in the presence of the four, then asked Dan to repeat the accusation made against the cubs by the pheasant farm owner. "First, is this your badge?" he asked Red, showing him the one Brad had brought to his office. "It sure is," Red cried. "Where'd you find it?" "Mr. Silverton picked it up on his farm near a couple of dead pheasants," the cub leader answered. "Red, serious accusations have been made against all of the cubs. I call you here to ask you a couple of questions." "Shoot," invited Red, shifting his weight uneasily. You and Chip showed that Indian feathered headdress around the village and elsewhere." "Why, yes," Red admitted. "I guess maybe we shouldn't have picked up the feathers, but we didn't see any harm in it at the time. We were kind of proud of the thing that we had made." "Now, for the second question. You boys found the feathers lying on the ground." "We sure did, Mr. Hatfield. I hope you don't think that either Chip or I would have taken them from the live birds." "I'll show you the very place where we picked them up," Chips added. You can bet your life we didn't go around plucking them out of the live birds. Considering that Mr. Silverton has told the Cubs to keep off his property, I'm afraid I won't be able to see the place, Mr. Hatfield said, smiling, but I do accept your words. How are you going to prove to other folks that we didn't steal the feathers? Red demanded. First off, I'll pitch that headdress. No, Red, the damage has been done. Hiding the headdress now would only tend to confirm suspicion. You mean Chips and I can enter it into the Pack Handicraft show? I'm not sure I'd want to do that after what's happened. There's plenty of time to decide on that later, Mr. Hatfield returned. He arose from his desk, a signal that the interview was at an end. Meanwhile, I'll see you at the powwow tomorrow night. With the help of Mr. and Mrs. Holloway, the den had planned its weekly meeting on the Native American theme. Midge and Fred had spent a better part of 4 days setting up teepees in the Holloway background. The taunt gunny sacks had been painted with gaudy colors in various designs. Hope it doesn't rain again and ruin the job, Midge remarked as he surveyed his work. Nearly all of the Cubs had finished their bows and arrows, and a few were working on items that they hoped to enter in the Pack Handicraft show. Admittedly, the elaborate feather headdress made by Chips and Red was by far the best article so far turned out by Den 2. But while the two boys followed the Cub leader's instructions and brought the headgear to the powwow on the appointed night, they no longer were proud of their handiwork. Though other Cubs were careful to avoid the subject, everyone knew that the feathers had become a symbol of an uncleared charge hanging over all of their heads. Entirely unknown to the den members, Mr. Holloway and the Cub leader had tried without success to see Paul Silverton the previous day. Through his secretary, the sportsman had sent word that he was in conference and could not be disturbed. Determined that the unfortunate affair should not mar the powwow, Mr. Hatfield and Mr. Holloway made no mention of their failure to iron out the differences. By the time the parents of the Cubs began to arrive at the Holloways, a roaring council fire was burning in the beach area near where the teepee had been set up. At a smaller fire some distance away, Mrs. Holloway stirred a huge kettle of fragrant stew, which would serve after the ceremony. The tom-toms presently burst into life, and Sam Hatfield grabbed a quick snack and then donned the Indian blanket and took to the center of the circle. Relating the story of Aquila, the chief of the Webelow tribe, he told of the strength and the wisdom of the great leader's father, Arrow of Light, and his mother, Kind Eyes. From the wolf of the forest, Aquila learnt the language of the earth. He told the listening Cubs, and from the bears he acquired the secret names of the trees and calls of the birds. Courage he learned from the lion. Mr. Hatfield then explained that the Webelow's tribal name had an inner meaning, which in the organization signified progress from wolf rank through bear and lion classifications to the ultimate goal of full-fledged scout. Webelows, he repeated, spelling it slowly. Loyal will be. And that's what does Arrow of Light signify, inquired Mac. Progress towards good citizenship. Cubs, like the Indians of old, must be self-controlled, loyal, game and quick, willing to talk little and listen much. If our Cubs live up to the rules, if they are square and game, our den will be respected and make its influence felt in the community, added Mr. Sewell, one of the den's fathers. The first part of the program complete, he then told the Cubs of the exciting trip he recently had taken to Mesa Verde National Park, site of the Cliff Dwellers. The Cubs asked a great many questions and examined pottery and blankets which Mr. Sewell had brought back from the native country. After that, Fred, Mac, and Dan put on a Native American ceremonial dance characterized by more energy than grace. Presently, the powwow concluded with all the den members forming a living circle. In close formation facing inward, each cub grasped the thumb of the hand on the boy to the left, raising right hands high in the two-finger cub signal. Up and down like a pump handle went their hands as the boys shouted, "Aquila, we'll do our best." At the word best, all the cubs snapped sharply into salutes. "Now for the grub," shouted Red, breaking away. "That stuff's in the kettle sure smells good." "Lead me to it," yelled Chips. Dan and Brad circulated amongst the parents, waiting until everyone had been served before they took their helping of stew. In the chill night air, the hot food exactly hit the spot. Time after time, the cubs went back for more until the big kettle was nearly empty. Brad and Dan sat silently apart from the others, their faces flashed with firelight. They were slightly staring out across the dark river when Mr. Hatfield, coming up behind them, touched their shoulders. "Don't say anything to the other cubs," he warned in low tones. "Just follow me to the beach." "What's up?" Brad asked in surprise. "I'll tell you at the beach." Wondering why the cub leader was acting so mysteriously, the pair quickly put aside their plates and joined him at the dock. To their further surprise, Mr. Hatfield began to untie the dinghy. "What's doing?" Brad asked again. "That's exactly what I proposed to find out," Mr. Hatfield replied. "A few minutes ago I heard a car turn down into that old logging road." "Near Silverton's place?" Dan interposed. "Yes, at least I think the car was on the logging road, and I'm quite certain I saw a flashlight on Silverton's property." "Then I was right the other night about a flashlight," Dan cried. "Are you going to investigate?" "Figured I might row up the river and look around." "Want to ride along?" "We sure do," Brad declared, stepping into the boat. "I've already told your parents not to expect you home for an hour," the cub leader said as he shoved off. "I have my car here, and I'll drop you off at your homes after we get back." Few lights showed along the dark shore as Mr. Hatfield slightly plied the oars. The boat spurted along, propelled by powerful strokes. Nearby, a sizable fish leaped from the swift-moving water and fell back with a splash. Hunched into their jackets, Dan and Brad speculated upon what the cub leader might expect to see or find once they reached the old logging road. "Maybe we have no business going there," Mr. Hatfield said presently, swerving the boat toward shore, "but I figure it this way. The cubs are under suspicion, and it's up to us to clear our name if we can." "You think someone may be sneaking into Silverton's place at night and taking pheasants?" Dan guessed. "Then we get the blame?" "It's an angle I intend to investigate," Mr. Hatfield admitted. "I'm looking around, though. We'll have to respect Mr. Silverton's order not to trespass." "In that case, it may not be easy to learn anything," Brad said, a little disappointed. Without replying, the cub leader eased the boat in until it grated on the beach. Brad and Dan leapt out into the wet sand, and Mr. Hatfield's aide pulled the craft well beyond the reach of the greedy waves. The three hid the oars in a clump of bushes and set off at a fast walk towards the exit on the old logging road. As they approached the log fence barrier, Dan suddenly halted. "Say, isn't that a car coming out onto the road now?" he demanded. In the obscure light shed by the half moon, they saw a shadowy figure replacing the removable rails of the fence opening. Another man sat behind the wheel of a station wagon which had passed through to the main highway. "Come on," Mr. Hatfield urged the cubs, hastening a step. "Let's see who they are before they drive away." However, as he spoke, the man at the fence suddenly abandoned his efforts to replace the rail. Allowing it to drop to the ground, he moved swiftly to the waiting station wagon and scrambled in. With a roar of the engine, the station wagon pulled away. "Quick! See if you can read the license number!" Mr. Hatfield exclaimed, turning the beam of his flashlight on the rear plate. "Can't make it out," Brad muttered. "The plate is covered with mud. Maybe on purpose." "I thought the first two letters were W.A., Dan said. "Couldn't be sure, though." Mr. Hatfield went over to the fence rail. "The car may have had a right to be on Silverton's property," he commented as he stooped to lift the loose rail into place. "All the same, I didn't like the way those fellows rushed off when they saw us coming." "They were up to something all right," Dan declared. "They acted as if they were afraid we'd see them." An automobile whizzed past on the main highway. Its bright high beams momentarily illuminated the logging road. Dan bent to tie a dangling shoelace. In stooping, he noticed a small piece of cardboard laying by the railing almost at his feet. Absently, he picked it up, thinking that it looked like a railroad ticket check. Then his interest quickened. "Say, turn your flashlight a minute, Mr. Hatfield," he exclaimed. "I think I found something." Do, 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 do.